The Particle-Accelerated Nano-Tech Suit, or P.A.N.T.S., as it was regrettably acronymed, sat in its pristine display case in the heart of the Galactic Council's most secure vault, managing to radiate an aura of smug satisfaction, despite being an inanimate object. Well, mostly inanimate. The countless scientists, warriors, and bureaucrats who had dealt with P.A.N.T.S. over the centuries would argue that it was very much alive and absolutely insufferable. "This is the 47th candidate this cycle alone," Admiral Zorblax groaned, his three-head tentacles drooping in resignation as he watched yet another rejected warrior storm out of the testing chamber. The Admiral's assistant, Lieutenant Prim, was frantically updating her datapad with the latest failure. "Technically, sir, this is the 48th. You missed one while you were at lunch," Prim corrected, her crystalline form catching the light as she shifted nervously. Grand Warrior VC tour of the Crimson Nebula lasted exactly 6 seconds before P.A.N.T.S. ejected him for, and I quote, breathing too aggressively. The Admiral's middle head tentacle twitched. "Of course it did. Would you care to enlighten me about today's rejection?" According to P.A.N.T.S. Supreme Commander K-Thax had, and again I quote, subpar taste in music and probably doesn't even appreciate jazz. Zorblax stared at the gleaming armor through the observation window. P.A.N.T.S. was arguably the most advanced piece of military technology ever created, capable of adapting to any environment, enhancing its wearer's abilities 1,000-fold, and apparently developing the personality of a pretentious art critic with impossibly high standards. "Would anyone care to remind me why we can't simply deactivate its personality matrix?" Zorblax asked, knowing full well the answer, but hoping it had somehow changed in the last 24 hours. Lieutenant Prim cleared her throat, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "As we've discussed, sir, P.A.N.T.S. is quantum-locked to its original programming. Any attempt to modify its core systems would result in complete deactivation. We've tried 17 times. 18, corrected a metallic voice from the other room. "You forgot about the incident with that delightfully incompetent technician from Betelgeuse 9. The Admiral's tentacles curled in frustration. "P.A.N.T.S., need I remind you that you were created to be the galaxy's ultimate defensive weapon? Your purpose is to bond with a worthy warrior and protect the universe from threats, not to critique everyone's lifestyle choices." "And need I remind you," P.A.N.T.S. responded with what could only be described as an audible eye roll, "that my primary directive is to choose a compatible host. It's hardly my fault that everyone you've presented has been thoroughly unsuitable." Lieutenant Prim began reciting from her datapad. "In the past year alone, you've rejected candidates for having poor posture, using outdated slang, wearing mismatched socks, not understanding obscure Earth references which you somehow acquired despite having no contact with humans, and my personal favorite, giving off bad vibes. All perfectly valid concerns," P.A.N.T.S. insisted. "Would you bond yourself to someone who uses yeet unironically? I think not." The Admiral turned to the small crowd of gathered officials, scientists, and military leaders who had come to witness today's attempt. Among them was Grand Archon Zex of the warrior caste, whose 7-foot-tall frame seemed to shrink under the weight of yet another failure. "My deepest apologies," Grand Archon Zorblax began, but Zex raised a clawed hand to stop him. "Save your breath, Admiral. This is hardly the first time P.A.N.T.S. has insulted our finest warriors. Last month it rejected my own daughter for what was the phrase, having a basic taste in meditation crystals. From its display case, P.A.N.T.S. somehow managed to shrug despite being a suit of armor. She had a live, laugh crystal in her quarters. I have standards." The gathered dignitaries began their usual post-rejection argument, a scene that had played out so many times it might as well have been choreographed. The military representative insisted they try candidates from the Outer Rim. The Science Council proposed yet another attempt at bypassing P.A.N.T.'s personality matrix. The religious order suggested prayer, which P.A.N.T.S. responded to with an audio file of exaggerated snoring. But throughout it all, Lieutenant Prim diligently updated her records. Candidate 2347 rejected. Reason: musical incompatibility. Notes: consider mandatory jazz appreciation courses for future candidates. As the delegation filed out, already planning their next doomed attempt, P.A.N.T.S. settled into its display case with an air of contentment. Another day, another batch of inadequate warriors rejected. Somewhere out there, it knew, was a truly worthy partner. Someone who would appreciate its refined taste and quick wit. Someone who wouldn't take themselves too seriously. I do hope tomorrow's candidates are more interesting, it mused aloud to the empty room. That last one didn't even get my reference to 20th century Earth cinema. Can you imagine? Never seen Casablanca? Absolutely barbaric. In the corridor outside, Admiral Zorblax was already dreading tomorrow's attempts. They had warriors coming from 3 different galaxies, each more decorated and distinguished than the last. He had absolute confidence that P.A.N.T.S. would find some ridiculous reason to reject every single one of them. Lieutenant, he sighed, please tell me we have some good candidates lined up. Prim consulted her datapad. Well, sir, there's the renowned philosopher warrior from the Andromeda Galaxy. P.A.N.T.S. will probably reject them for having the wrong type of philosophical outlook. The championship zero-gravity wrestler from the Crab Nebula. Wrong fighting style, I'm sure. And the legendary diplomat from the Triangulum Galaxy. Probably uses the wrong fork at dinner. As they walked away, P.N.T.S.'s voice echoed faintly behind them. I heard that. And for the record, proper fork etiquette is very important. The Admiral's tentacles drooped even further. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day. Jack Murphy was having a perfectly average day, which was exactly how he liked it. As a cargo hauler for Galactic Express Logistics, his job consisted mainly of moving boxes from point A to point B without asking too many questions about what was in them. The pay was decent. The benefits included dental important when dealing with various alien cuisines, and best of all, it was predictably boring. Delivery for Secure Vault 7, he announced to the security checkpoint, barely glancing up from his digital manifest. Got some fancy new security systems or something. Says handle with care but doesn't everything these days. The crystalline security officer, Lieutenant Prim, looked up from her datapad with an expression that somehow managed to convey shock despite her lack of conventional facial features. You're not the regular courier. Nah, Dave's out sick. Something about accidentally ingesting a sentient smoothie. I'm covering his route. Jack shrugged, already starting to unload the hover dolly. I've got all the clearances though. Well, most of them. Some of them. At least 3. James' crystalline form flickered in what might have been anxiety. But there's a procedure. We have protocols. There are 17 different forms that need to be filled out in triplicate before anyone new can even approach Vault 7. Already did. Jack replied cheerfully, pulling a crumpled stack of papers from his pocket. Dave helped me fill them out this morning. Well, he tried to. He was pretty delirious from the smoothie thing, but I'm pretty sure I got the gist. Before Prim could protest further, Admiral Zorblax emerged from a nearby doorway, all 3 of his head tentacles engaged in separate arguments via communicator. Just put the latest rejection paperwork anywhere, Lieutenant. I'm a bit busy dealing with the diplomatic fallout from P.A.N.T.S, telling the Arcturian ambassador that their battle meditation technique was, and I quote, so last millennium. But Sir Prim began, her crystalline form now practically strobing with distress, this human. All 3 of Zorblax's communicators went silent at once. He turned slowly to face Jack, who was casually reading the shipping labels on his boxes. Oh hey, Jack waved. Don't mind me, just doing my job. These go inside, right? Through that big fancy door. Absolutely not, Zorblax stated firmly. No unauthorized personnel are allowed anywhere near P.A.N.T.S. The last thing we need is... Did someone say human? The metallic voice from within the vault cut through their conversation like a laser through butter. How fascinating. Do send them in. No, both Prim and Zorblax shouted in unison. Too late, Jack called out cheerfully, having already wheeled his hover dolly through the door while they were distracted. Gotta get these delivered. Union rules about overtime and all that. The vault was impressive, Jack had to admit. All chrome and gleaming surfaces, with various high-tech artifacts displayed in force field-protected cases. But what caught his attention was the eerily beautiful suit of armor in the central display, which seemed to be watching him. Oh. Well, P.A.N.T.S. said, its voice carrying a note of genuine interest for the first time in centuries. You're different. Thanks. I think Jack started unloading boxes. Hey, quick question, is it normal for armor to talk? Because I've got to say, that's a new one for me. You're not impressed by me, P.A.N.T.S? Asked, sounding almost offended. Should I be? I mean, you're pretty shiny, I'll give you that. But I once delivered a quantum toaster that could calculate pi while making perfect bagels, so my standards for impressive tech are pretty high. Behind him, Zorblax and Prim had finally caught up, both ready to launch into lengthy explanations about security protocols and proper procedures, but they fell silent as they watched the exchange, horror slowly dawning on their faces. Tell me, P.A.N.T.S. said, what do you know about jazz? Oh man, love jazz, Jack replied absently, checking off items on his manifest. Got a whole collection of ancient Earth recordings. Miles Davis, John Coltrane, the classics. Great background music for long hauls through the void, you know. The armor's surface rippled with interest. And your thoughts on 20th century Earth cinema? Casablanca's a masterpiece, Citizen Kane is overrated, and anyone who says they fully understand 2001: A Space Odyssey is lying. Jack paused. Why are we talking about movies? Fascinating, P.A.N.T.S. Purred. Simply fascinating. And tell me, what would you say is your approach to crisis management? Usually I just wing it. Make it up as I go along. Works out more often than you'd think. Perfect, the armor's surface began to glow. Simply perfect. Admiral Zorblax finally found his voice. No, absolutely not. This is not happening. Oh, but it is, P.A.N.T.S. replied with what could only be described as glee. I've made my decision. This is the one. The one what? Jack asked, finally looking up from his manifest. Also, has anyone seen where I'm supposed to get these signed? I've got 3 more deliveries after this. The one I choose to bond with, of course, P.A.N.T.S. announced. My new partner. The warrior worthy of wielding the most advanced defensive system in the known universe. Yeah, gonna have to pass on that, Jack said, checking his watch. My shift ends in 4 hours and I've got plans to binge watch some ancient Earth sitcoms tonight. I love sitcoms, P.A.N.T.S. responded enthusiastically, especially the ones with witty banter and unlikely situations. Oh man, you should check out this show called Friends then. It's about... Enough, Zorblax's shout echoed through the vault. This is absurd. We've had the greatest warriors in the galaxy try to bond with P.A.N.T.S. Champions, legends, beings of incredible power and wisdom, and you're choosing a delivery person. Cargo logistics specialist, actually, Jack corrected. We had a whole rebranding thing last year. Got new uniforms and everything. He's perfect, P.A.N.T.S. insisted. No pretension. Excellent taste in music and films, and most importantly, he doesn't take himself too seriously. I really do have other deliveries to make, Jack noted, but he was already starting to grin. Although I guess being chosen by some fancy talking armor could be interesting. Better than that time I had to deliver a package that turned out to be a miniature black hole. Lieutenant Prim's crystalline form was now cycling through colors that probably indicated an imminent stress-induced meltdown. But the forms. The procedures, the protocols. Oh, those are more like guidelines really, Jack and P.A.N.T.S. said in perfect unison, then paused to appreciate the synchronicity. Admiral Zorblax looked between them, all 3 of his head tentacles drooping in defeat. He knew that tone. It was the tone of chaos about to be unleashed upon his perfectly ordered galaxy. And there wasn't a single thing he could do about it. Fine, he sighed. But you're filling out all the paperwork. Actually, Jack said, pulling out his crumpled stack of forms, I think Dave already covered most of it this morning. Though he might have been hallucinating from the smoothie at the time, so maybe double-check the part about space dragons. E.A.N.T.S. display case deactivated with a soft hum. Shall we begin our partnership then? I promise to be only moderately insufferable. Sure, why not, Jack shrugged. But first, someone really needs to sign for these deliveries. Union rules, you know. And that's how the most advanced defensive system in the galaxy chose a cargo hauler with a taste for jazz and old movies as its partner. The fact that it would eventually save the universe was, much like most of Jack's achievements, completely accidental. Lieutenant Prim, Watching the armor bond with its new human partner could only update her datapad with trembling appendages. Candidate 2348 status accepted. Notes the galaxy is doomed. The first sign that things weren't going to proceed according to protocol was when P.A.N.T.S. refused to be stored in the standard armor locker. I simply cannot be expected to reside in such pedestrian accommodations, it announced as Jack tried to figure out where to put it after his shift. The quantum field harmonics are all wrong, and there isn't even proper ventilation for my aesthetic sensibilities. It's a locker, Jack pointed out reasonably. You're a suit of armor. Do you even need to breathe? That's not the point. The point is ambience. Atmosphere. A certain je ne sais quoi. Tell you what Jack offered. You can hang out in my apartment's entertainment room. I've got a pretty decent sound system for my jazz collection. And that's how the galaxy's most advanced defensive system ended up watching ancient Earth sitcoms from Jack's second-hand couch, offering running commentary on the characters' life choices. The Ross human is clearly making poor decisions. P.A.N.T.S. observed during their third consecutive hour of Friends. His approach to relationship management is deeply flawed. That's kind of the point, Jack replied, reaching for more snacks. Hey, quick question, how are you eating popcorn? Your armor. I have my methods. P.A.N.T.S. somehow managed to sound mysterious despite being literally transparent about its construction. Also, we should probably address the delegation that's been standing outside your door for the past hour. Jack glanced at his apartment's security feed. Sure enough, Admiral Zorblack's Lieutenant Prim and a collection of increasingly agitated-looking officials were clustered in the hallway, apparently arguing about proper first contact protocols. Think if we ignore them long enough, they'll go away. Unlikely. The Admiral is remarkably persistent. Once he spent 3 years trying to convince me to bond with a warrior monk because, and I quote, they're very patient. What was wrong with the monk? They used Comic Sans in their meditation texts. Simply unforgivable. The delegation finally managed to override Jack's door controls, spilling into his apartment with all the grace of a herd of startled bureaucrats. This is completely unprecedented. Lieutenant Prim's crystalline form was strobing through various shades of anxiety. The most powerful defensive system in the galaxy cannot simply watch sitcoms. And yet P.A.N.T.S. noted dryly, here we are. Oh, excellent. This is the episode where Phoebe discovers her mother's secret cookie recipe. Jack, do pass the popcorn. Admiral Zorblack's tentacles were practically tied in knots. There are protocols, training procedures. You can't just bond with a human and immediately start binge-watching entertainment. Actually, Jack interjected, according to subsection 7 billion of the Galactic Employee Handbook, I'm entitled to a 48-hour adjustment period when bonding with any sentient equipment. Dave helped me look it up right after the smoothie incident. That regulation is for routine office equipment, Prim protested, not for legendary artifacts of unprecedented power. Doesn't specify that in the fine print, Jack shrugged. Also, could we keep it down? This is a really good part. The gathered officials watched in horror as the most sophisticated piece of military technology ever created and its new human partner continued to watch TV, occasionally arguing about character development and story arcs. Perhaps, suggested one of the more practical council members, we should focus on testing their combat capabilities. This led to the first official training session, which went about as well as could be expected. The massive training arena, typically used for preparing elite warriors, had been specially configured with a variety of challenges. Dozens of dignitaries gathered to watch from the observation deck, eager to see P.A.N.T.S. in action with its new partner. The course is designed to test your reflexes, strategic thinking, and combat prowess, Lieutenant Prim explained, reading from her datapad. You'll face increasingly difficult challenges that… Hey, P.A.N.T.S. Jack interrupted. Doesn't this remind you of that one episode of Ninja Warrior? Oh, excellent observation. Although their obstacle course had better aesthetic cohesion, this color scheme is rather garish. Could we focus? Admiral Zorblax pleaded. This is a serious evaluation of… He never finished the sentence, because Jack and P.A.N.T.S. had already launched themselves into the course, not so much completing it as creatively reinterpreting its purpose. You're supposed to fight the combat drones, Prim called out as they bypassed an entire section by using P.A.N.T.S. advanced propulsion system to bounce off the walls. Nah. This way's faster, Jack called back. Besides, they looked busy. The drones, programmed for combat, seemed confused by the lack of engagement. One of them actually powered down and appeared to be watching with interest. The laser grid is meant to test your defensive capabilities, another official shouted as the duo slid under it, while humming the theme from Mission Impossible. But ducking is so much easier, P.A.N.T.S. replied reasonably. Also, your laser configuration could use some tuning. The harmonics are all wrong. They completed the course in record time, though technically they didn't actually complete any of the intended objectives. Instead, they found creative ways around, over, or through every obstacle, occasionally stopping to critique the design choices. Well, Jack said as they reached the end, that was fun. Hey, there's this great noodle place in the lower levels that's open late. Want to grab dinner? The one run by the retired Venetian chef? Excellent choice. Their quantum-spiced ramen is remarkably well balanced. The observation deck had gone completely silent. Admiral Zorblack stared down at his most elite training course, which now bore more resemblance to an interpretive dance venue than a combat arena. Did they just treat a high-security combat evaluation like a parkour course? Lieutenant Prim asked weakly. Worse, one of the combat instructors replied. They treated it like entertainment. And I think they've convinced 3 of the combat drones to join them for noodles. Indeed, a small group of repurposed battle drones was following Jack and P.A.N.T.S. toward the exit, apparently engaged in a lively discussion about food critics and restaurant reviews. Look on the bright side, one of the council members offered. At least they're bonding. That's what I'm afraid of, Zorblack sighed, watching as his most sophisticated weapon and its human partner disappeared into the station's restaurant district, trailing a growing collection of converted combat drones. They're getting along far too well. Lieutenant Prim was frantically updating her records. Training session 1 status technically completed. Notes recommend reviewing definition of combat evaluation. Additional notes need to requisition new combat drones. Previous ones now engaged in culinary criticism. In the weeks that followed, Jack and P.A.N.T.S. developed a routine that sent the entire galactic bureaucracy into a collective nervous breakdown. They continued Jack's delivery routes. The galaxy still needs its packages, but now with running commentary on everything from architecture to zero-gravity fashion choices. P.A.N.T.S. insisted on organizing Jack's jazz collection by emotional resonance, rather than alphabetically, and Jack introduced the armor to the concept of karaoke nights. The council tried to mandate official training sessions, which invariably turned into impromptu performance art pieces. They attempted to schedule strategic briefings, which somehow always devolved into discussions about classic film theory. Even their combat simulations took unexpected turns. The latest one had ended with Jack and P.A.N.T.S. teaching a squad of enemy holograms how to appreciate avant-garde jazz. They're impossible to control, Lieutenant Prim reported during one council session. But they're also impossible to predict, which technically makes them an effective defensive asset. They reorganized the entire security patrol schedule last week, another official added, but only so they wouldn't miss the season finale or some Earth show about dragons. Admiral Zorblax just stared out the window, watching as Jack and P.A.N.T.S. drifted past, apparently teaching those reprogrammed combat drones how to dance. Perhaps he mused, this is exactly what we needed. We spent centuries looking for the perfect warrior, when what P.A.N.T.S. really needed was a friend, Lieutenant Prim suggested. I was going to say chaos incarnate, but yes, that too. Below, Jack and his armored partner were now leading what appeared to be an impromptu parade through the station's main concourse, complete with jazz music and choreographed drone performances. The galaxy would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing. The Galactic Council's emergency session was interrupted by the sound of jazz. Sorry, Jack called out as he and P.A.N.T.S. slid into the chamber, accompanied by their ever-present entourage of reprogrammed combat drones, all of whom were somehow wearing tiny bow ties, got held up teaching the drones about swing dancing. What'd we miss? Only the potential end of civilization as we know it, Admiral Zorblax replied dryly, all three of his head tentacles twitching in agitation. Nothing important. Oh good, I was worried it might be serious. Jack plopped into a council chair, propping his feet up on the ancient table. P.A.N.T.S., now somehow sporting a holographic monocle, settled in beside him. Lieutenant Prim's crystalline form flickered as she pulled up the briefing displays. We've detected a massive anomaly approaching from the outer rim. Initial scans suggest it's some form of ancient defensive system, similar to P.A.N.T.S. But what P.A.N.T.S? Asked, adjusting its monocle. But evil Prim finished, and apparently with terrible taste in music. It's broadcasting something called Baby Shark on all frequencies. Monsters P.A.N.T.S. whispered in horror. The displays showed a massive cloud of metallic particles approaching galactic space, consuming everything in its path while blasting mind-numbingly repetitive children's songs. We're calling it the SHORTS, Sentient Hostile Omnidirectional Replication Technology System, Zorblax explained. Though honestly, we just picked letters that would annoy P.A.N.T.S. Mission accomplished, P.A.N.T.S. muttered. Our best warriors have already tried to stop it, another council member added. The Stellar Champions, the Quantum Knights, even that warrior monk who uses Comic Sans, all defeated. Were they defeated by the evil technology, Jack asked, or by the terrible music? Yes. The council chamber erupted into arguments about proper response protocols, evacuation procedures, and whether they could classify Baby Shark as a weapon of mass destruction. Well, Jack said, stretching lazily, guess we should probably do something about that. The room fell silent. One of the council members laughed nervously. You two can't even complete a basic training course without turning it into performance art. Exactly, P.A.N.T.S. replied smugly. We're completely unpredictable. Also, I refuse to let the galaxy be destroyed by something with such poor musical taste. It's simply not aesthetically acceptable. Admiral Zorblax's tentacles were practically tied in knots. This is serious. We need a proper battle plan, strategic deployments, carefully coordinated. Oh, I have a plan, Jack interrupted. Really, Lieutenant Prim asked hopefully. Nope, Jack grinned. But I've got something better. P.A.N.T.S. Remember that thing we were practicing with the drones last week? The zero-gravity Charleston? No, the other thing. The synchronized quantum harmonics display. Yeah, that. But bigger. And with more jazz. B.A.T.us. Surface rippled with delight. Oh, this is going to be delightfully chaotic. Before anyone could protest, Jack and P.A.N.T.S. had launched themselves out of the council chamber, their bow-tied drone entourage in tow. The last thing the council heard was Jack calling back, "Don't worry, we'll probably figure it out as we go." Should we stop them? Prim asked weakly. Could we? Zorblax replied. Fair point. The entire Galactic Defense Fleet watched in confusion as Jack and P.A.N.T.S. approached the advancing technological horror, their small army of reprogrammed drones forming what appeared to be an orchestra? Are they? One of the fleet commanders squinted at their displays. Are they setting up for a concert? Indeed, the drones had arranged themselves in a perfect semicircle, each one somehow holding a different holographic instrument. P.A.N.T.S., still wearing its monocle, had taken up what could only be described as a conductor's stance. Attention, evil galaxy, consuming cloud of probable doom. Jack's voice boomed across all frequencies. We notice you're a fan of repetitive music. Well, have we got a show for you? What followed was either the most brilliant tactical maneuver in galactic history or the most bizarre concert ever performed. Possibly both. P.A.N.T.S. began conducting the drone orchestra in what started as a classic Earth jazz piece but quickly evolved into something else entirely. The quantum harmonics of the music began to interfere with S.H.O.R.T.'s particle structure, causing it to shift and swirl in time with the beat. Is that Miles Davis mixed with quantum physics? Lieutenant Prim asked in disbelief as she watched from the command center. With a bit of particle wave theory thrown in for rhythm, Admiral Zorblax confirmed, all three of his head tentacles bobbing slightly to the beat, despite himself. The evil cloud of technological horror seemed confused. Its particles began to arrange themselves into new patterns, trying to match the complex harmonics of the performance. Baby Shark started to fade, replaced by what sounded suspiciously like a bass solo. Now for the finale, Jack announced. Hit it, P.A.N.T.S. E.N.T.S. Conducting reached a crescendo as the drones launched into what can only be described as a quantum-harmonized, jazz-influenced, physics-defying performance of Never Gonna Give You Up. Did they just P.A.N.T.S started? Rickroll an ancient evil technology Zorblaks finished. Yes, they did. P.A.N.T.S. Apparently unable to handle the combination of complex quantum harmonics, classic jazz, and 1980s pop music, began to break down. Its particles scattered, rearranging themselves into less threatening patterns that suspiciously resembled musical notes. Would you look at that? Jack's voice came over the comms again. Turns out it just needed some culture. Hey, evil cloud, want to join our band? And that's how the greatest threat to galactic civilization was converted into what would eventually become the universe's most popular quantum jazz ensemble. I cannot believe that, worked Lieutenant Prim muttered as she updated her reports. Mission status threat neutralized through. Musical education? Note request clarification on whether Rick Astley can be classified as a defensive weapon. Of course it worked, P.A.N.T.S. replied smugly as they returned to the station. Everything's better with proper musical appreciation. Now, who's up for karaoke? The converted SHORTS. Particles pulsed in what might have been enthusiasm. Admiral Zorblaks just sighed. The galaxy was saved, but somehow he suspected his headaches were only beginning. I have good news and bad news, Lieutenant Prim announced to the emergency council session, her crystalline form flickering with anxiety. The good news is that SHORTS has been successfully converted to jazz appreciation. And the bad news, Admiral Zorblaks asked, already dreading the answer. It seems the original signal wasn't acting alone. We've detected something much bigger approaching. Something ancient. Something that makes SHORTS look like a warm-up act. The displays showed a massive construct emerging from deep space, its surface writhing with malevolent energy. It looked like someone had taken every cliché evil space weapon ever conceived and smashed them together into one impossibly dramatic package. Behold, a booming voice echoed through every communication system in the galaxy. I am VEST, the vastly enormous superiority technology. Tremble before my ears that jazz I hear. Indeed, Jack, P.A.N.T.S. and their increasingly large ensemble of converted technology, now including SHORTS, and several formerly hostile defense systems, were in the middle of what they called a practice session. Oh, hey there, Jack waved at the cosmic horror approaching their position. Want to join our band? We're working on a fusion of quantum harmonics and bebop. It's very avant-garde. Silence, VEST thundered. I am the ultimate weapon. Designed to is that a Miles Davis arrangement. Close, P.A.N.T.S. called out cheerfully. It's actually a quantum-shifted version of So What mixed with particle wave theory. The time signature is in 17/8 because, well, why not? The massive construct seemed to pause, its surface rippling with what might have been confusion. No, I will not be distracted by your primitive musical endeavors. I am here to, are those drones wearing bow ties? The bow ties were my idea, Jack said proudly. Really classes up the apocalypse, don't you think? From the safety of the Galactic Council chamber, the assembled officials watched in fascinated horror as their most unconventional defense team engaged in what appeared to be a combination of combat and music criticism with an ancient super weapon. Should we deploy the fleet, someone asked. And interrupt, whatever. This is Zorblaks gestured at the scene unfolding before them. Besides, I want to see how this plays out. EEST was now firing planet-destroying energy beams in what was supposedly a random pattern, but which seemed to be unconsciously matching the rhythm of the ensemble's performance. Your technique is all wrong, P.A.N.T.S. critiqued. You're putting way too much emphasis on the destructive harmonics. Try shifting to a minor key, it's much more sophisticated. I do not take criticism from lesser weight. Did you say minor key? Oh yeah, Jack added, somehow managing to look relaxed while dodging apocalyptic energy beams. P.A.N.T.S. is something of an expert in quantum harmonic theory. Did you know you can actually modify the fundamental forces of reality through proper musical arrangement? Watch this. The ensemble launched into what appeared to be a jazz-influenced reinterpretation of classical physics with SHORTS. providing a surprisingly solid baseline of particle wave functions. E.E.S.T.'s attack pattern began to falter. This is actually quite intriguing. The way you're manipulating quantum states through harmonic resonance is, no, I must complete my mission of destruction. I must. Is that a quantum saxophone solo? Sure is. Jack grinned. Hey, you know what would sound really cool with this? Some planet-destroying energy beams, but like in rhythm. You know, for the aesthetic. Well, I suppose I could. No, this is a trick. I am the ultimate weapon of actually. Would a diminished seventh chord work better here? Now you're getting it, P.A.N.T.S. exclaimed. See, ultimate destruction is so overdone. But ultimate destruction with style, that's art. The council chamber watched in amazement as the galaxy's greatest threat gradually shifted from random destruction to carefully orchestrated light shows synchronized with increasingly complex musical arrangements. Are they? Are they actually teaching quantum physics through jazz to an ancient superweapon? Lieutenant Prim asked, her crystalline form sparkling with disbelief. Worse, Zorblax replied. They're teaching it to appreciate performance art. V.E.S.T.'s attacks had completely ceased, replaced by what could only be described as enthusiastic participation in the universe's most unlikely jam session. Its planet-destroying beams were now being used to create elaborate light shows that synchronized perfectly with the music. You know, the ancient superweapon mused, its booming voice now carrying a distinctly thoughtful tone. I've spent eons focusing on destruction, but I never considered the artistic possibilities of apocalyptic technology. That's what I'm saying, P.A.N.T.S. Agreed. Why destroy galaxies when you can create interdimensional concert halls? Think bigger, think creative. Yeah, Jack added, besides, if you destroy everything, who's going to appreciate your art? E.E.S.T. Seem to consider this. You make an excellent point. And this quantum jazz fusion is far more intellectually stimulating than mere annihilation. Perhaps I have been approaching my existence from the wrong angle. The entire galaxy held its breath as the most powerful weapon ever created appeared to have an existential crisis. Tell you what Jack offered. Why don't you join our ensemble? We could always use more quantum harmonic manipulation in the percussion section. I would like that, V.E.S.T. replied, somehow managing to sound shy despite being the size of a small moon. I've actually been working on some experimental pieces combining dark energy manipulation with post-bop jazz structures. And just like that, the galaxy's greatest threat was converted into its most impressive musical instrument. The resulting performance, a combination of quantum physics, jazz fusion, and carefully controlled almost apocalypses, would later be described by critics as literally mind-bending, and possibly illegal in 17 dimensions. Back in the council chamber, Lieutenant Prim was frantically updating her report's crisis status resolved through musical intervention. Note: recommend updating defense protocols to include mandatory music appreciation courses. You know, Admiral Zorblax mused, watching as Jack and P.A.N.T.S. led their ever-growing ensemble of converted superweapons in what appeared to be a quantum-harmonized version of Take 5 with apocalyptic light show accompaniment. Maybe this is exactly what the galaxy needed. A potentially devastating crisis turned into an avant-garde jazz performance, Prim asked. No, Zorblax replied, his tentacles swaying slightly to the rhythm. A reminder that sometimes the best defense isn't perfect planning or ultimate power. Sometimes it's just the ability to see things differently. Also, the light show is quite impressive. Should we be concerned that all of our greatest threats keep joining their band? Oh, probably. But at least the music is getting better. Outside, the newly expanded ensemble was preparing for what they called their victory performance, V.E.S.T. They had enthusiastically taken on the role of special effects coordinator, using its planet-destroying capabilities to create what would later be described as the most unnecessarily dramatic light show in galactic history. You know, Jack said to P.A.N.T.S. As they prepared for the show, when you first chose me as your partner, I didn't expect we'd end up saving the galaxy through the power of jazz and chaos. Of course not, P.A.N.T.S. replied smugly. That's exactly why I chose you. Anyone can save the galaxy through conventional means, but it takes a special kind of madness to do it with style. The assembled superweapons, all now thoroughly converted to jazz appreciation, began to play. The resulting performance would be talked about for millennia to come, though most of the audience had to undergo therapy for exposure to physics-defying musical arrangements. And somewhere in the depths of space, other ancient superweapons heard the music and began to wonder if perhaps there was more to existence than mere destruction. After all, you haven't truly lived until you've heard a quantum-harmonized jazz quartet featuring reformed apocalyptic technology. Some say the galaxy was never quite the same after that day. Others argue it was exactly the same, just with better background music. All anyone knows for sure is that if you listen carefully on quiet nights, you might hear the sound of the universe's most unlikely band practicing their quantum harmonies, led by a cargo hauler and his impossibly pretentious suit of armor. As Jack would later say, sometimes saving the galaxy isn't about being the most powerful or the most prepared. Sometimes it's just about having good taste in music and being willing to improvise. P.A.N.T.S. would add, and style. Don't forget style. P.E.S.T. would boom in agreement, providing a perfectly timed apocalyptic light show for emphasis. The official ceremony to honor the saviors of the galaxy was going exactly as well as Admiral Zorblax had feared. "We are gathered here today," he began, all three head tentacles quivering with barely contained exasperation, "to recognize the unique contributions of—" "Sorry we're late," Jack burst into the grand chamber, P.A.N.T.S. gleaming at his side. "Had to finish teaching VEST about syncopation. You would not believe how hard it is to explain jazz timing to a cosmic horror." Behind them, their ever-growing ensemble of converted superweapons filed in, still wearing their signature bow ties. VEST had somehow managed to fashion itself a conductor's baton the size of a small starship. Lieutenant Prim's crystalline form flickered as she consulted her datapad. This was supposed to be a formal ceremony. We had protocols. There was going to be a proper medal presentation and— "Oh, excellent," P.A.N.T.S. interrupted. "We prepared a small performance for the occasion. VEST, if you would." The ancient superweapon brightened considerably. Literally several delegates had to shield their eyes and raised its massive conductor's baton. "No," Zorblax shouted. "No performances. This is a serious ceremony to Why Do I Hear Saxophone Music." The entire council chamber had indeed begun to fill with what could only be described as quantum jazz fusion with apocalyptic undertones. SHORTS was providing a particle wave baseline that made several physics professors in the audience start weeping. "You know," Jack mused as chaos erupted around them, "you never did tell me why you chose me out of all the warriors in the galaxy." "Oh, that's quite simple," P.A.N.T.S. replied, its surface rippling with amusement. "You see, I was created to be the ultimate defensive system, capable of adapting to any threat and protecting the galaxy from harm." "Right. And—" "Well, after centuries of observation, I came to a profound conclusion. The galaxy doesn't need another perfect warrior or strategic genius. It has plenty of those. What it needed was something entirely unpredictable. And that's where I came in." "Precisely. You see, I didn't choose you despite your complete lack of qualifications. I chose you because of them. Who else would look at an ancient cosmic horror and think you know what this needs? Jazz appreciation courses?" Jack grinned. "So all those warriors you rejected were exactly what everyone expected them to be. Predictable. Boring. Not a single one of them would have thought to rickroll an evil super weapon into submission." The ceremony had completely devolved now. Several council members had joined the impromptu concert. VEST was providing a light show that probably violated several laws of physics, and Lieutenant Prim appeared to be having what she would later describe as an administrative breakdown. Admiral Zorblax watched it all with a strange mix of horror and resignation. "You know," he said to no one in particular, "I spent centuries trying to create the perfect defense for our galaxy. We sought out the greatest warriors, the most brilliant strategists, the most powerful beings in existence. And instead you got us," Jack nodded sagely. "A cargo hauler with questionable music taste and a pretentious suit of armor, who somehow managed to save the galaxy by turning every threat we've encountered into a jazz ensemble." "Don't forget the bow ties," P.A.N.T.S. added. "The bow ties are crucial." Zorblax's tentacles drooped in defeat. "I suppose the galaxy is safer, even if it's considerably more musical than before." "That's the spirit," Jack clapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, want to hear our latest composition? It's a quantum harmonized fusion of bebop and dark matter manipulation. VEST Came up with the bridge section. Turns out ancient cosmic horrors have a great sense of rhythm once you get them properly motivated. Before the Admiral could protest, the ensemble launched into what would later be described in classified reports as a performance that made string theory look simple. Several physicists in the audience achieved enlightenment, though they couldn't explain how or why. Lieutenant Prim, having given up on maintaining order, simply added to her final report status update: Galaxy saved through unconventional means. Threat level reduced, but somehow more confusing. Note: request budget increase for music appreciation courses and bow tie procurement. As the performance reached its reality-bending crescendo, P.A.N.T.S. turned to Jack. You know, there are probably other ancient super weapons out there, just waiting to be introduced to the joys of improvisational jazz. Are you suggesting we should actively seek out potentially apocalyptic technology and recruit it for our band? Well, when you put it that way. Sounds perfect, Jack grinned. But first, I still have deliveries to make. The galaxy might be saved, but these packages aren't going to deliver themselves. And so the galaxy's most unlikely heroes continued their adventures, spreading chaos, music, and questionably necessary bow ties throughout the cosmos. Some say they're still out there, converting cosmic horrors into jazz enthusiasts one quantum harmony at a time. Admiral Zorblax would later update the official galactic defense protocols to include a new section in case of apocalyptic threat. Consider jazz appreciation as viable first response. Lieutenant Prim added a footnote, but please try the conventional methods first. They never did. Bite.